A potential 12-nation trade deal has taken a big step forward. After 5 years of negotiations, trade ministers from the countries involved announced Sunday they had concluded the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The TPP includes the U.S., Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and Vietnam. Specifically in Japan, the USDA says tariffs on U.S. beef, currently at 38.5%, will eventually be lowered to 9%. It also says Japan's gate price system on pork, where high-value and low-value products are put together to minimize tariffs, will also be significantly altered. Earlier this week, we talked with UNL Ag Economics professor Wes Peterson about how the TPP might impact agriculture and about the controversial issues involved in the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
I think the main controversies actually surround things that don't have much to do with agriculture. The intellectual property rights for pharmaceuticals, which would extend patent protection around the world, or to the other parties to this. There's another pro-business deal that has to do with investor-state dispute settlement. Those are going to be controversial, I think, and for those who are not wild about large corporations. These are very much pro-large corporations, and so the more populists among us would not like them too much. With respect to agriculture, it's always a controversial sector in trade agreements. It was controversial in NAFTA, it was controversial for the World Trade Organization. And in fact, what happened in Uruguay round led to an agreement on agriculture, and 5 years later they started a new discussion about trade agreements. This is the Doha development round. And that has been going on for 15 years. It still isn't resolved. And one of the main stumbling blocks is agriculture. It always is a problem. And so in TPP, this will be something where the U.S. will probably, agricultural interests will favor this because U.S. is an agricultural exporter. And so we should benefit. Some sectors in the U.S. may not. Sugar, for example, is not likely to do well out of this thing, depending on what the actual specifics are.
What are the potential growth areas for agriculture? How beneficial can it be?
Well, well, first of all, I think the effects will be small. I think that we will hear a lot of people talking about how it's going to be a disaster, it's going to save everybody's life, and so on and so forth. But actually, I think the effects will be pretty small. And I think they'll be small because for the U.S., our two main trading partners in the TPP group are Canada and Mexico, and we already have free trade with them. So there's very little scope for any kind of gain in trade with those. Japan is a different story. Japan has a very protectionist agricultural sector, and that's where we may be able to see some gains. Particularly for Nebraska, it would be important meat products, mainly beef and to some extent pork. There may be some gains in cereals, that would be corn and feed grains and so on, but otherwise the one expectation is that dairy would expand, but we don't do a lot of that here, and the country that has a comparative advantage in dairy is New Zealand, so it would be good for them, but not necessarily for the U.S.
The U.S. will have to give this the green light. Do other governments of the other countries also have to do that?
Yeah, all of the countries have to ratify the agreement that has been reached, and then it would enter into force. I'm not sure what would happen if Brunei, for example, decides to reject it. I think that we could just drop them from it and go forward with the rest. If the U.S. were to reject it, I think that would mark the end of the TPP, but I think the chances are pretty good that it is going to ultimately be approved.
What will we hear for pros and cons once this thing starts getting debated?
Well, I think that there will be a lot of, we've already started hearing this. I mean, there will be a lot of people who will claim that this kills jobs. I think that's just not an issue at all. I think that's just one of the things that everybody says about any trade agreement is that it will, all of the jobs in the U.S. will move off to some other country. The other things that we have already been hearing about are some of these controversial pro-business, the intellectual property rights and investor-state dispute settlement issues. In agriculture, we can expect that livestock producers, meat producers, and cereal grain producers and so on will probably be in favor of this. Other sectors such as sugar will probably not. Australia is a major sugar supplier, and depending on how the agreement works, that could undercut our sugar industry. So, I think there will be a lot of controversy and so on, and I think a lot of exaggeration. There will be a lot of people that say this is going to have enormous impacts, either for good or bad, when in fact I don't think it's going to have very big impacts on much of anything.
Again, Congress will need to approve the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but that decision could take months.